Black Rifle coffee, baby. Breeding fuel.
It's funny. I was thinking in here, we were getting this thing set up and I was like, do you remember Red Green?
Oh yeah. Red Green
dude,
show. Yeah.
I grew up on Red Green and especially with how close this is right here.
Yeah.
I just feel like I'm on a Red Green set. Right?
Yeah.
Like that show was.
If they don't find you handsome, they should at least find you handy.
Like that show was my youth. I remember my stepdad showing me that, like, we would watch that show religiously. And that was, in a weird sense, it was like this redneck comedy, but like you felt like you watched that show and you're like, I want to go do handy. Like, I want to go do handy stuff. I want to go be handy, you know?
My dad loved that show. Yeah.
That
was awesome.
in Escanaba and De Moonlight. Do you remember that
I don't
movie?
remember that.
You don't remember that movie? Oh, okay, so it's Jeff Daniels. You got to go watch it because they go to deer camp in northern Michigan, and it's about these 4 guys, and Jeff Daniels is just in prime form, like playing a true Michigander, and like there's
reminds me of the song "The Turdy Point Buck."
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
it's like that, but in a movie with Jeff Daniels, and he just nails it. But yeah, I was excited to get you on because speaking of being handy and American ingenuity, you are like undertaking a pretty wild chapter in MKC history right now.
Yeah, it's been a wild ride. I think back to when you and I were hunting deer in Arizona and sitting there glassing, and I was picking your brain for all it was worth to try to kind of learn what you guys had done in the early days with Black Rifle and, you know, growth and marketing and just kind of dealing with scale. We were just starting to grow at that point, but had no idea where it was headed. And it seems like yesterday, but oh man, also a lot has changed since then. I mean, it's, you're now a dad and married, and MKC's growing. It's just been crazy.
Yeah. And Hank's like ready to go out into the world, and he has hands
I was
the size
taller.
of frying
I was
pans
taller.
now.
I was taller than him at that point. Yeah, he's a monster now. Yeah.
But you're building this industrial manufacturing.
Yeah.
Like putting the money where the mouth is when it comes to like American made. What was that decision like to be like, we're gonna do this?
Man, I thought about it for so many years that I feel like in a way everything's happening the way that I thought it could happen. I mean, I literally, when I was a lineman for the power company, I would sit in the bucket truck and for hours, and frankly for years, especially one particular lineman, one of my foremen, Dave Kennedy, I would talk to him about like Montana Knife Company and starting it and what it could be and how we would do it, and we would brainstorm, all these different things. And just he's a big time hunter, elk hunter, fan of the outdoor industry, super legit, hardcore hunter. And so we talked about it, and I registered the name when I was 19, but I didn't start it until I was 39. So for that 20 years, it was just an idea. And in that time period, as I thought about it, you started seeing things like replaceable blade knives coming along, and more of our manufacturing being outsourced and shipped overseas. And, as men, we've generally passed down knives and guns. And I started seeing, people putting less thought into like what they were going to do with that thing down the road. Like I remember getting my first knife from my uncle. I've had thousands of people, hundreds at least, if not thousands, come into my shop and ask me to sharpen a knife because their dad carried it in Vietnam, or their uncle was a bush pilot in Alaska, or whatever. Just their grandfather was an electrician. That was the pocket knife he carried every day. And that's all they have left. And we've always passed down knives and guns as men, especially. And then all of a sudden, we're just throwing blades away. We're not, you now have a young son. When you were in Iraq and doing what you were doing in the military, you probably weren't thinking about the knife you were carrying, that you're going to pass it down to your kids someday. You're just doing your thing. But I guarantee if you had some of the stuff that you carried back then, down the road, that's going to mean a lot to your kid, you know, if you pass those things down. And so kind of going back to what you were asking me, I thought there were enough people in this country that still cared about American made that we could grow a company on that and not be the cheapest knife, but try to be one of the best and provide quality and then back it up and take care of it for life and do it all in America. And people kept telling me it was impossible. I was at an event, a knife kind of making event in Arizona in 2019 in March. And I was showing some guys some of the Blackfoot prototypes that I had made. And I said, I'm going to start this company and I'm going to make it all here in the US. And there was a couple knife makers there that they're really good custom makers, but they have some of their knives made overseas and they do like production runs of them overseas. And they were telling me like, dude, you can't compete doing all that here. Like there's no way. You have to do it overseas. You can get good quality and whatever. And I just felt like they were missing, like the demand was what the American public would support it.
Yeah.
And so kind of kicked off and just started really small. I mean, I just made 200 the first batch, you know?
Yeah. And you get that. I'm sure it exists within a few different industries these days. You know, there's definitely a push to like take back the American industry. But why do people say it's impossible within your industry?
It is impossible if you're going to just look at it from a price point. You know, if you're going to just try to race to the bottom of the price barrel at Cabela's and be competitive from just a price standpoint and try to be in a $49, $39, you know, fixed blade range, like that is impossible. You're not going to make that in America and pay employees well and pay benefits and build a manufacturing facility and hire people. Like you're just not. So I believed that I could price a knife at $200 to $300 to $400, which, you know, it's a fair amount of money, but most anybody can afford it if they want to afford it. And especially if they look at it over a long lifespan of like, hey, I'll send this back in and get it sharpened a few times. It's the only knife I'm going to buy for the next 10 years. Well, then it gets pretty cheap. That was really the big thing. And then also just there's not big factories in the US where you can, like, I could just call up China. I get offers every single day in my email from factories in China. They'll make start to finish our knife and wrapped in a package and, you know, delivered to us ready to sell. Right. There isn't that option in the US. So if you want to do it in the US, the way I had to do it, I had literally had to just figure it out. And I had to job shop every part of the knife process around in the beginning, all around the nation. So my blades would hop from place to place all around the country. And frankly, they still do a little bit of that. That's why we're building our manufacturing facility, because I started this, we bootstrapped it. I didn't have investors. I didn't borrow any money. My wife's dad had passed away and he left us about $20,000, and my wife said, just go buy steel for that and that was the money that I used to like buy the first steel for the first run of Blackfoots. Yeah. And so and I was making high-end knives one at a time. So I knew nothing about production knife making, and I just had to learn it. And I made a lot of mistakes early. I was doing things wrong, and I was getting charged up the ass from certain job shops that, like I learned later, I was getting kind of hosed. And so you just learn. And I started refining that process. And then we started having enough growth where I started looking at each step of the process. And you could use this, people can use this for if you want to make duck calls, if you want to make coffee grinders, if you want to make freaking anything, you just look at it as a step-by-step process. What's the step from the design all the way through the finished product? And I started looking at those steps and going, well, that's a step I can bring in my tiny little shop and do here, even if I have to hire a guy that has expertise in that. So I started attacking the steps that were feasible financially or space-wise and bringing those into our shop. And I started in my 2-car garage, and then we built a bigger building in my horse pasture back behind my shop that we're in today. And we maxed that shop out in the last couple of years here. And so now we're building a really big manufacturing facility where we'll be able to bring the rest of all the processes in-house. But we also bootstrapped this, so we never took on investors or borrowed money to try to like rush the process. So we only just have been bringing in each step as we could afford to do it,
So the goal is to become 100% vertically integrated at some point.
Yep. And we're learning like there's actually other benefits that I didn't know in the beginning of doing this that we would find. Like, when you're making something in production, you want to make it as fast as possible, as cheap as possible, but also at the highest quality as possible, right? And so you have to find that line where like, okay, you get too fast, you start losing quality, and you get too cheap, depending on if you're trying to do that on materials or whatever. We never were going to cheapen on material, and we were never going to let our quality drop. So you try to find speed and efficiencies. But what you learn is when you outsource parts to be made by another shop, they don't necessarily care as much as you do. And so we were getting handles in or getting parts in that were out of tolerance, and we'd have to reject, if we'd order 1,000 sets of handles, we might have to reject 200 pairs. Well, now that we're milling our handles in-house, our guys have really tight tolerance, right? And then that helps speed up your assembly, because if your assembly pieces are going together perfectly, you're not sitting there fiddling around with every single part, right? And so you find efficiency. So it's not just the price you're paying, say, for the knife handle to be made. It's now also the benefit of like, oh, we can now assemble it faster too. And we don't have to order in big giant batches and then wait for FedEx. And then the guy that makes the handle says, yeah, I shipped them last week. I don't know where they're at. Come to find out he hasn't even shipped them yet, right? So these are the struggles of small business, learning how to become bigger and just working through the process. And I started hiring engineers, started hiring like an operations guy. I think the best thing I've done from the very beginning personally is know that I actually don't know most things. And so I just tried to hire really good people and empower them to do it. Right. My director of operations, Andrew, Army guy, Ranger guy, just awesome dude, great leader, came from the world's largest company in Amazon and knows operations and can run a tight ship. And he's phenomenal at that. Right. Hire great machinists and just trust them to run parts. Right. Hire engineers and trust them to design and find flaws in our process. And it's just step by step building this one step at a time.
Yeah. Was that something that you had?
Excuse me.
Where did that intention come from as far as being like, because a lot of people, they're like, I want to be able to control all this stuff. Was there something that really hit home with you as far as I'm going to hire these experts? I'm not going to try and do all of this myself. What was the precipice for that?
I mean, I did the knife making one knife at a time thing for a living for 10 years. And when you try to do everything yourself, then the minute you take off and you head to Austin, Texas to go to archery country, you're now not making money, right? There's no one there working if you want to take a weekend off with your kids. And so I lived that kind of starving artist, everything on your own shoulders part of it. And I also knew you just can't grow a big brand and a big company by doing it all yourself. And that's also not a company that can be passed down if it's all on yourself, right? If I want to step away someday and my kids want to run it or somebody else. I think a lot of this is just, I don't know if it's stubbornness or what, but when you and I were hunting, I had no idea how I was going to grow what we've grown. I just knew we would do it. And it was literally just problem solving the biggest problem every day. Like solve what is the biggest problem today and solve that. Now, that only goes so well if it's on your own shoulders. You can only solve so many problems in a day by yourself. But if you start adding really good people around you, and now 5 of you are solving the biggest problems every day, and then all of a sudden it's 10 people, like you start solving a lot of freaking problems fast. But you have to empower people to say, I don't know, fix it, find a reason, find the answer and solve it. And I think our guys are phenomenal at that. I think that's why part of why we're winning so hard is we move at kind of a light speed. Like we make decisions. I mean, our engineers were complimenting on us and our machinists the other day because they came in and they presented a plan for me to buy a $750,000 machining center. And the meeting was about 3 or 4 minutes long. They just gave me the ROI.
God, that's so great.
And I was like, all right, buy it. And they were just like, well, that's it. And I got a message from my one machinist after, and he was like, I just got to tell you how, like that decision would have taken a year at my last company and it took you 3 minutes, and I'm like, well, you presented me the data. It took you 3 minutes to say, here's what it's costing here. Here's what we're going to make it for. Here's how long it's going to take to pay it off.
Yeah.
What more is there to talk about?
Yeah. What are you doing at the top of the ladder to ensure the company ethos is trickling down into what MKC is as a whole? Because you see, like, you go through what you guys are presenting from a media standpoint, your forward-facing stuff. It comes off in the sense of there's an immense amount of pride. There's the team. It seems like you guys are all on the same sheet of music. Mm-hmm. And why is that?
I mean, I do think it starts with me for sure. And then it started with me finding people like Brandon, my business partner, who is like-minded, gets the mission and understands what he's trying to accomplish. And then finding a couple other people like Jason and Andrew that are executives, my wife. But then we invest in our team pretty heavily. Every single week we have a meeting in our shop, and we probably open up more than I would think any other company would about finances, goals, what our struggles are, what's challenging us right at the moment, what's going well, what's not. And then we read letters from our customers to our team, customer emails that come in. We talk about problems we found, on maybe a Facebook user society page where it's like, hey, this knife got to this customer not good enough. How did this happen? Right. We talk about these stories about we might be making 1,000 knives and I can pick any one of those off and package that up and send it to a random customer. And he's giving that to his dad for his retirement gift from the military of 40 years. Right. It could be like this unbelievably important, or he takes that knife on a sheep hunt that he's been saving on for 25 years, hunt of a lifetime.
Yeah.
That every single knife we're making, and we try to impart this on our employees, everything we're making is that person's heirloom. It's their story. It's something they're going to give or pass down or use. But we also bring in other people from outside I try to treat our employees like I would want another company to treat my children. So frankly, I think we try to teach them things they should be learning in school. I bring in bankers. I brought in the president of our bank to talk about how banking works and loans and debt. And I want these young kids working in my shop to either grow up through our company and become leaders. And we've modeled that. Like Tristan that I hired, he was a senior in high school. He was my first employee. He's now managing 35 people downstairs next to Melissa. And I've shown them that if you do the right things and you invest and you buy into what we do as far as leadership and learn and grind, you'll get rewarded and you'll have leadership roles in our business. There is a path out of the sharpening room to the top. I just brought in the superintendent of schools of Frenchtown to talk about what a mill levy is. When they're going to be voting on their taxes next week, and most people go to vote and they don't know what the fuck they're voting for. Like, what is a mill levy? Where do your taxes go when you pay your taxes, right? So I brought in our 401k guy to talk to them about investment stuff, and I'm going to bring in a real estate guy to talk about like setting a goal to buy a home. What are they going to need? So I guess the answer is we're trying to. I guess the last thing I want to say with that is we even gave like a resume class. Andrew, my guy from Amazon, he hired like 4,000 people at Amazon. And he told our guys, most of you that got hired on here, your resumes and your interviews sucked. We hired you anyway because we could see you were good. if you're going to leave here, we want you to be successful. And so we teach them resume classes, how to interview, writing cover letters. Because even if they leave us, I want them to be successful. This is what businesses in America should be doing, is like helping make better citizens. And so I feel like that form of investment gives you also more dedicated employees in the end, because they know we actually care about them.
Yeah.
You know,
I think that goes a long way. And you talk about company culture, and there's an old saying, like, if you're talking about it, you're doing it wrong. It's just the way it is. And that trickle down effect creates something to where it's like, oh, wow, this individual cares so much about me. He's willing to help me leave. Like, this is where I want to stay. And I'm sure you're getting a lot of that right now.
Yeah. And we do have some kids leave. Like we just had a few kids leave here in the last month. One kid's going to start an electrician apprenticeship. One kid's going to go pack mules in Glacier Park. One kid's going to work at a fishing lodge in Alaska. You know, a couple of those are like epic adventures, you know, and if you're in your early 20s, like, do epic shit.
Yeah.
Right. You guys say that all the time. And if making knives in a factory setting isn't your dream, but being an electrician is, like, go do that. Like, I don't want people to stay with us. If they come to work for us and they realize after a year, like, it's not really my thing, I want to help you go find your thing. I don't want you there if you don't want to be there, right? I want people who are invested and understand the mission, and also that see the future of, like, what this can be. Like, we're still in my backyard. What we're about to do with this new building facility, like, I mean, we're trying to conquer the world.
Yeah.
You know, Montana Knife Company is going to, I think, eventually be a lot more than just a knife company. You know, it's going to be a major brand. And I think some of our employees see that future, but that future could take 10, 15 years to come to fruition.
Yeah. So what is that, that ultimate goal with specifically sticking to the building and this kind of this layer that you're adding in the middle of right now?
Yeah. So we bought a piece of property right at the exit as you're coming into Missoula from, say, the Idaho side on Interstate 90. When you come into the exit that goes north to Glacier Park up to Andy Stumpf's coffee shop there in Kalispell, we are right at that exit. And so what's also really cool about that, it's not just a manufacturing facility, but we're going to have a retail store with a Black Rifle Coffee in it. So this is a sanctioned, or whatever you want to call it, licensed Black Rifle Coffee shop in our facility. So you're going to be able to come into that building. We'll have knives for sale. We'll have apparel and lots of different stuff from different friends, partners of ours in there. And you'll be able to sit in that coffee shop. But what's cool about that is there's going to be big glass windows that look into our manufacturing floor. And that whole building's about 50,000 square feet. We just poured concrete on the upstairs mezzanines yesterday. We're going to start pouring the coffee shop floor on Tuesday or Thursday of this next week. But the goal of that, and what I find the most pride in, is when you're arriving into Missoula, our building's the first building you see on the hill coming in. Huge. There's going to be a huge, really tall American flag there, and it's going to say Montana Knife Company. It's not Amazon. It's not Walmart or Home Depot. It's a freaking Montana company brand that was born and bred right in that valley that welcomes people to our state. And the goal is to show that American manufacturing, even in small, tiny areas, is possible. Like, we already we have 80 employees now. I expect we'll have 200 to 300 employees in the next 5 to 7 years. And that's all in it's not in Portland or Phoenix or Dallas. It's in freaking Frenchtown, Missoula, Montana. And it's to show that, and you can do it without huge investors. I mean, again, we may be kind of stupid. We've passed up a lot of opportunity to have people like money come in and help us grow faster and maybe with less risk. But I'm so nervous about allowing something like that to come in and then start having them try to change our course based on what some investor tells us we should be doing. Yeah. So every decision we make is what's we think is best to make the best knife for our customer and grow this thing, even if it takes us a little longer to do it that way, you know. But it's going to be it's a beautiful facility that we're building. It's going to be really cool. The coffee shop looks right out on Snowball Mountain Ski Resort. It's freaking epic.
I'm curious what I have certain assumptions when it comes to what you do in business, and I can't imagine that the process of ordering raw materials isn't super complicated and difficult to manage within your industry. What is it like to get, especially with the amount of growth that you've had, the amount of steel that you need in order to do what you're trying to do?
Yeah. I managed all that until the end of 2021. It was all in my head. And this is where, again, when you have to make a decision to do it all yourself or let someone kind of help you out, right, and empower them. That's when I hired Andrew from Amazon. He had that military background, kind of leadership sense and whatnot, and he took over a lot of that supply chain operation stuff. And I'm a computer idiot. He actually got all of this stuff put out on timelines and computer, and because it started to become a bit of a monster.
Yeah.
Well, in the last couple of years, that's grown, exponentially. And thank God Andrew really had things laid out well. We then went and hired a new guy here last year, honestly, with no experience in this. He's a Green Beret and retired guy that is just an awesome dude. And I've told him this, I actually lobbied against him when Andrew was trying to hire him, because we needed a supply chain guy so bad, because we were drowning in, like what you're saying, the complexity of running this monster. And Andrew was about to break because he was also trying to manage all this massive amount of hiring and all of the planning around that. And so we interviewed a bunch of people with supply chain experience, and frankly, they sucked. Like, the people with experience came in like entitled, and it was just weird. Like, none of them felt like a culture fit. And initially Andrew wanted to hire this guy, and I was like, man, he doesn't have any experience at all. Like, he shot people and he trained snipers, and he's a super good dude. And Andrew was like, no, he's a freaking problem solver. That's what Green Berets are. Like, he will come in and he will solve our problem. He'll learn fast. And after some bad experiences interviewing, finally, this is where you have to just trust your people. I told Andrew, I'm like, you know what? He's your guy. You have to train him. Go for it. Do it. And if it doesn't work, it's got on you, but it'll be on you because you're the one doing the job now.
Yeah.
He hired Brent, and Brent's been an absolute stud. That guy picked this stuff up. He learned it completely from scratch. And this is, I think, a good lesson that I knew and I almost needed to relearn, because when I was an apprentice lineman, we always like to hire groundmen and then make an apprentice and then teach them all the way along. And I think it's a lot like you get a guy in the military, goes through basic, and then they learn all the way along. And eventually, maybe they end up going through the pipeline and becoming special forces, but you actually learn, and you operate side by side with that person, whether you're a lineman or you're in business or whatever, and their weaknesses, their strengths, and they also learn the culture of your business from the ground up. And Brent has been unbelievable. He learned all that stuff, and now he is running the entire supply chain pretty much without help, and he's been with us less than a year. And it just goes to show, I think it's really critical to hire for culture and for work ethic. And then you can teach that kind of a person who has the right attitude what you need them to know. I was looking for that just plug-in that had all the answers. And I think we would have ended up, frankly, in a way worse situation.
Yeah. Well, I think that's super interesting too for the veteran listeners out here who are getting out of the military and then trying to start something fresh. I've heard it from so many different people, so many different veterans who have become successful with outside of the military, is embracing what it's like to be a new guy again, which is really fun if you fully commit yourself to it, towards like, all right, I'm going to sweep up the floor and I'm going to do whatever is necessary. When you have that mindset towards something, there's really no limitations to what you can ultimately accomplish if you have this this deep, dark passion towards just problem solving, like you're saying.
And he came in, no ego, super quiet, and we put him downstairs with our knife techs, just putting knives together, like the most basic. And we moved him through every process, just learning, because if you're going to run the supply chain, you have to know where the hell those parts go and what they're for. Right. So he did. He didn't come in like some macho guy or that he was better than anybody. He was super quiet, and he asked tons of great questions. He stayed late. Like, he just ground it out. And for this last year, I can't tell you how much, because also he wasn't much of a big computer guy. And that was actually Andrew's biggest concern, was like just grasping the computer operations side of this. Cause it has to happen on a computer, you know, and spreadsheets and all that stuff. And dude, Brent, he just ground it out. And like you say, he started from the ground floor again and went through it. But I think his background, is largely to, you know, the results prove that background helped him get through that and do that.
Right.
You know,
he
knows how to grind it out.
Yeah. Has that kind of shaped the way that you've gone about process when it comes to hiring and what you're looking for since then? They say, like, don't hire the perfect fit, find the right fit.
Yeah, it was more of a reminder, because I kind of knew that, because that wasn't the real first experience with that. But it's easy sometimes when you get so much in a bind that you tend to sometimes forget. This could go for core values. It could go for a lot of different things, but you forget the things that you know, and you're hoping for the magic pill that's going to like solve everything. Just the easy button. But I know from our executive team standpoint, absolutely. It just reassured that, like, we have to be hiring for culture fit. And culture isn't just like, are you a hunter or fisherman or whatever, but it's like work ethic, right? And attitude. Like, are you okay with going into the shop and just bead blasting every day for 2 straight weeks and doing nothing but bead blasting? Like, boring ass, hard, just stand there. Like, if you're not willing to do that for just 2 weeks, then we're not going to get where we need to go.
Yeah.
You know? But the people that are willing to do that means they want to invest in the whole entire process and understand it.
Yeah.
You know,
and as far as the expansion goes, like, you guys are expanding physically as far as location goes, but you're also expanding the type of product that you're offering to. And you did I think the tactical line has been like 8 months or so since you've launched that or something.
Yeah,
like that?
we've had it most of a year now.
Yeah.
We just had a bunch of tactical knives. I'm not a veteran, and I always make sure and point that out. Cause sometimes I think, because I hang around with cool people like you, that people just sometimes think I am. And I'm like, no, I'm not. I'm a hunter, which is why I started a hunting knife company. But I think a lot of the principles that make a great hunting knife make a great tactical knife. But I've leaned on a lot of my friends and asked for a lot of advice from people to try to problem solve what the tactical community needs in a knife. And I think we've come out with some pretty good products, and we're going to keep coming out with more.
Yeah. And
then we're going to expand into folding knives next year. Very excited about that. We have some really great prototypes. We're frankly right now solving like the manufacturing chain, supply chain, just nailing that stuff down.
On the tactical side, what considerations are going into what you ultimately end up developing when it comes to looking at previous design? Like, you look at the V42, like, all of that had so much intention. Like, it was a dagger, and it was a specific length because it could go in under the rib cage, and it could hit the heart at like that exact distance for what the average human torso was. And, during World War II frame, like, how much thought are you putting into some of the stuff that you're doing in this line?
Definitely a lot of thought going into a lot of that stuff. So there's one thing I learned is I started figuring this out. You could ask 10 Navy SEALs what the perfect knife is to have on their kit, and you'll get 12 answers out of 10 guys. And same with Green Berets or Marines or whatever. It was actually frustrating to me because I'm like, well, I'm just going to go ask some of my buddies and they're going to be like, this is what I need. And their buddy's going to agree with them. And it was not.
Yeah.
In fact, I got some really terrible answers from some guys too. I'm like, that's why you're a SEAL and you're not a knife maker.
I'm like, what?
Just razoo crazy designs that like one guy would want to carry like some big ass, crazy ass curved blade. And it's like, no one else would want that. Like, and it is really, I think it's actually similar to hunting. You talk to some guys in the military and it's like, look, I'm not going to pull out my blade and have to stab anybody. I just want a utility knife. I want it to be as light as possible. I want it to be small, out of the way. I want to open an MRE, cut a little bit of rope, and just have it out of the way. And then you talk to the next guy and it's like, I want to stab dudes straight through the chest. I want it to be robust. I want to pry lug nuts off my Humvee. I want to open doors with it. Like they want like a big, heavy, unbreakable weapon. And then there's everything in between, you know, where it's like, well, I kind of want some length, but I don't want too much weight. Your weight's always a consideration. If you're a hunter or you're a guy rucking,
yeah,
weight is a consideration. And so now as a knife maker, you start trying to walk that balance between, you know, you start taking weight out. At what point do you start to compromise the integrity of that blade, and how much stress can you put it through? Right. And so what we ended up figuring out is like, we need to offer a variety of knives and let the guy choose. And that guy might have 3 blades and choose somewhat mission specific of what he needs for that particular, you know, you might need a sear knife just for sear training.
Right.
And then you might stick it in a truck or in a cockpit or something like that and hardly ever touch that blade again. It's just kind of around in there. And you have like a small little war goat on your kit.
Yeah.
You know,
so kind of treating it the same way you would when it comes to the type of weapon you're carrying, depending on whether or not it's CQB or you're going out for a multi-day mission out in the bush. Just allow it to kind of have variety within your doing, instead of just being like, this is the Montana Knife Company knife tactical style.
Yeah, I learned that you just can't say like, this is the knife. It's because even for hunting, people ask me all the time, like, if I get one knife, like what should I get for my dad? He's a hunter. And it's like, well, what does he hunt? Like what, you know, is he kind of a big gear nut guy? Does he love to count ounces and, you know, play with all that? Is he like big custom wood stocks on his gun? Is he like a big custom knife with a wood handle? And, you know, it's like, there's all kinds of variation. Also, what we did is we made a bunch of prototypes and then I took them down to Brian Morgan's at Hat Creek in Idaho, where he does special forces sniper training down there. And, one of the best dudes I've ever met in my life, to be honest. He's such a sweetheart. But I went down there for the Nasty a couple years ago. It's a competition, and I'm sure a lot of people on this podcast with this background will know it. But it's a special forces sniper competition with active duty guys and all across different branches. They even that year had a Dutch team there. But he was nice enough to just let us come and hang and get to know the guys while they were in camp and whatnot. And then I've gone over there too, and I've shot with their guys when he's running them through courses, and he was nice enough to kind of let me shoot with them and train with them. But I just took prototypes and asked them, and I got actually a bunch of feedback from those, and came back and I changed every one of those models a little bit based on kind of some like consensus of the guys of like this or that. With the V42, you know, that's such an iconic knife. I didn't want to do a replica of that knife unless if you're going to do a replica, it has to be a replica. Perfect. And I wasn't going to do stacked leather or something like that. Exactly. I also don't know personally, it's my belief, I don't know that that's really the perfect dagger to carry on your kit. It's pretty long. They were known to break a lot. They were pretty long. They were hard and kind of thin, and they did have some breakage issues with those original ones. But if I'm a guy jumping out of a plane, the other thing I don't like is that it has a sharp pommel on the end of it. You know, that skull crusher idea. Yeah. I think a skull crusher is stupid. If you're going to pull that thing out and smack a guy in the top of the head with it, I'm probably going to just stab him with the actual blade. Like, especially in a military sense. Like, if it's bad enough you're pulling your dagger out and you're bashing a guy in the top of the head.
Well, we're talking about like fantasy kills at this point. Like you might as well, like, if that's what you're trying to do, it's like, like it was always a thing. Like, does anybody have an MRE spoon kill? Right. Like now you're just talking like, do I have the opportunity to do whatever I want with whatever tool I have? Right. Like the E-tool was always the same thing within the Marine Corps, right? Like, does anybody have an E-tool kill? Yeah. Like, come on. Like, well, what side would you use? Would you use the serrated side of the E-tool or would you use the sharp side? You know, like, do you sharpen your E-tool? Now I got to sharpen my E-tool because what if I have a chance to do this? So like, there's just so many rabbit holes that you can get on with this. And I think it's kind of the same way you're talking about this idea of it being an heirloom. Like these things have meaning to us. And like all of these answers that you're talking about from guys like me personally, I'm the same way. Like I want a K-bar knife because it's part of my heritage. I've used it a bunch, right? Yep. Like I know what it's like to use that in multiple different scenarios, whether that be like in a combat setting or you're using it from a utility standpoint or from a hunting standpoint. Like I'm that guy. Like I like the heft of it. I like to be able to like, you know, my skills when it comes to skinning could be improved vastly. And a lot of times, like when it comes to like taking care of joints, like I'll just use it like a chop blade and and it works really well.
Sure.
Right? Like everybody's like in there with their little Havalons, like cutting around the joints. I'm like, or you could just chop this and I'm done before you.
We can just Neanderthal this thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's kind of what our sear knife is, you know, and it's similar to that K-bar. But with the V42, what I wanted to do is actually make like today's modern day version of what I think today's modern day soldier might
like what it would
carry.
Evolve to.
What could it evolve to? And so we made the V24 because it was last year, it was 2024 when we came out with it. And that's what the V42 was, 1942, victory of 1942. So V24, which I thought was cool. It happened to just be the reverse of that. And then we did shorten up the blade a little bit. I changed up the handle geometry to make it, I feel, a little bit more secure in the hand and then a little safer, frankly. If you come in hard on a jump or something like that, you're not going to have sharp end of the handle jabbing you in the throat or chest or whatever, however you're carrying it, rib cage or something. And again, I'm not trying to say it's replacing the V42. That V42 is iconic. I'm actually still trying to figure out how to get one. I'd love to have an original myself. I'm going to have a little museum set up in our shop. I just got a Fairbairn 6.
That's cool.
Dagger. But I want to just set up some iconic knives in our shop for people to see. So I'd love to have a V42 if anyone wants to send me one.
Yeah.
But our V24 knife, I think, is today's kind of modern day dagger. It's a little shorter, but it's still going to be freaking deadly. And again, you know, some guys will love to carry a dagger and a bunch of guys will be like, daggers are kind of pointless. Like, they want maybe a little more of the utilitarian style knife. Like we have our task force knife. I think that's our most well-rounded, just, it's not super big, but it's big enough to do plenty of work and it's thick enough to be pretty damn, it's strong. Before you start getting into like a sear size knife that's, you just know you're out doing lots of chopping and stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I don't envision most guys that are going to be interested in anything fairly high speed carrying a sear knife on them either. You know, if you're walking 5 miles to a target, I'm not carrying a sear knife, you know, but I do want a knife that if I end up out for 9 days, I can actually have some survival. That's where I think our task force knife is. That's the knife if I had to be out there accidentally, unplanned, that I would have that knife. Because you can also carry it on your kit and just use it for cutting rope or doing whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. Right on. We're cruising.
Doing my best to try to figure out what, and honestly, feedback. Like I love when I get messages from guys, like I love feedback. So guys can give that to me on my social medias. I reached out to a bunch of SEER school instructors when I was developing the SEER knife. I'm a knife maker. I'm not a soldier. So we will learn and just continue iterating and coming out with designs as we get feedback, you know?
Yeah.
So,
well, going back to the beginning, so you were the youngest Master Bladesmith
Mm-hmm.
ever. Is that right?
Yeah, I was 19 when I did that. Yeah.
And what does that mean?
Well, it relates a bit to what we were talking about with like durability of knives. So to become a master bladesmith, you have to join the American Bladesmith Society and be an apprentice for 3 years, which just means learning under anybody. There's nothing real formal about the apprenticeship. But then you have to test for your journeyman rating. And to become a journeyman, you have to forge a 10-inch blade. And it has to be, this is a performance test at this point. It has to chop a 1-inch rope in half in one chop, which just shows sharpness, which is not that hard. But then it has to chop 2 2x4s in half, as many chops as you want, and still shave hair at the end of that. So after the rope and the 2x4s, it has to shave hair off your arm. And then you have to bend that blade 90 degrees in a vise without breaking it. So that shows that you have the ability to select steel, heat treat that steel, grind it, finish it to an edge that will be sharp enough to cut rope, but also durable enough to go through board and knots and whatever else and not lose its edge, not chip. There can't be any edge deformation. You can't get through the test and have dents in your edge. So the edge has to be perfect, but then still show the control over your heat treat to be able to bend that blade in that vise and not have it snap. Once you do that, you present 5 knives to a panel of mastersmith judges at the Blade Show in Atlanta, and they judge fit and finish, how nice the knives are put together and design and all that. So I did that when I was 15 years old. And then you have to be a journeyman for at least 2 years, and then you're allowed to test for master. And you have to do the same test, but with a 300 layer Damascus steel blade that you forge. And then your knives that you present are Damascus steel for your 5 knives. And one of them has to be a Quillian dagger, which is just they're easy to screw up when you're making them. Everything's symmetrical, they're complicated. So I did that when I was 19. So there's like 140 or so in the world.
An Aquilian dagger?
A Quillian dagger, yeah.
What is that?
It's a Quillian dagger. The blade has to be 10 inches long. It's a blade, basically, and people can Google it, has basically parallel sides up for about 2/3 of the blade, and then it kind of rounds into a point, kind of a typical dagger. But then the handle has to be fluted, so carved, like mine was carved African blackwood. So these flutes you carve around it, and then you have to inlay wire rope. So like mine has sterling silver wire rope inlaid into the handle. And then Quillians are like the guards that stick out from the handle to protect your hand from sliding up on the blade. And so I machined those all out of Damascus steel as well. And I had a Damascus steel pommel on the end of it. So it's just a highly technical knife, and a symmetrical knife is really good to force someone to make, because if I'm making a knife that's not symmetrical, I can kind of like vary on my pattern and you would never know. I can make you any design knife and be like, oh yeah, it's cool. You meant to do this. And it's like, well, I didn't really. I screwed this up and I just ground it off and you never knew. If it's symmetrical, both sides have to match. It has to be this pattern. It forces a guy. You can be as creative as you want with those other 4 knives, but you have to make this. And do you have the ability to make what you intend to make? A lot of guys don't draw designs. They just kind of like forge stuff out and end up with they end up with. This shows control of your process, that you can be intentional.
Okay. So the steel selection thing, which is like, we're talking about knives, obviously. Knives are steel.
Mm-hmm.
What goes into that as far as what do you need to know in order to do that correctly? And obviously that matters a whole lot. What is the constraints within trying to develop and learn that side of it?
Yeah, I mean, some of that's in your apprenticeship. It's the guys you learn from. We now have, I did all that. Excuse me, getting over being sick. So I did all that testing. I'm old. I'm before the internet. So I did all that before YouTube. So I had to learn all that in shops. I had to go to knife shows and do all that. Now with the internet, so much at your fingertips, right? But when you select steel, like a mild steel doesn't have any carbon content in it. So you can heat it up and dip it in oil or in water and it won't get hard. So it won't hold an edge, it'll bend. But then if you have a steel that has too much carbon in it, or you harden it too hard, it can snap, it can break, right? And so you're looking for steel that have kind of the right elements. Also, like, are you looking for a steel that's a carbon steel, a stainless steel? Higher chromium content makes it stainless, along with other elements. Sorry, gotta get my water somewhere. But the heat treating process is you can learn a lot on the internet or from a master or whatever. But that steel selection, like back in the old days, a lot of knives were made out of like springs, like Studebaker springs. Yeah. 5160 steel is what the technical term is. But it's like, oh, my grandpa used to make knives out of old car springs. Great steel. Ball bearing steel. We actually still use it today. It's technically called 5200. What are ball bearings made to do in industry? And what have they done for the last 100 years? They resist wear. What does an edge on a knife need to do? Resist wear, right? It's a really, really phenomenal steel, but both of those steels are not stainless. So from a production knife standpoint, now you have customers dealing with knives rusting and you get, feedback and people bitching about that, right? So we ask people, like, if you don't mind putting a little maintenance into your blade, carbon steel is great. It sharpens easier than a stainless steel will. It's a little tougher and a little bit more forgiving. Excuse me. But if you don't want to put that maintenance in, we got blessed with this metallurgist who is the son of Devin Thomas, who actually shared he let me share his table with me when I was 12 years old at the Oregon Knife Show. Laren wasn't even born yet. Devin shared his table and I displayed my knives and sold my knives there when I was 12. 40 years later, his son, Laren Thomas, is now a PhD metallurgist, and Laren invented Magna Cut steel for the knife industry to make a stainless steel specifically for the knife industry to be, try to match or get close to rival the toughness of carbon steel, but actually has a little more edge holding ability. And so we use a ton of Magna Cut steel. It's stainless. It's awesome. It's not quite as tough as 5200. Like if you do that 90-degree bend test, it's not going to bend 90. But how often do you need to bend your blade 90 degrees in the field? That's more of a test to show you can do it.
Yeah.
So I guess the answer is there's a lot of different places people can go and learn that stuff. And then I always say my expertise stops short. Like when I have questions, I'll go look. Laren Thomas wrote a book. It's Knife Nerds. It's all about heat treating steel, knife steel, all sorts. There's probably 200 steels in there. And there's charts in there because you look at the hardness. It's an inverse scale. The harder a piece of steel, the less toughness you have. When you bring the hardness down by tempering, you heat the steel up, the hardness starts to lower, your toughness starts to come up. And so now you're looking for a balance, right? Okay. So if I'm making a chef's knife, I want to leave it hard because I'm not going to be chopping trees with it. And so a nice hard, thin edge, it's going to cut veggies well and whatnot. But if you hit a knot on a log, it's going to chip out the edge. If I'm making a sear knife and I know a guy's taking the tip and prying, kindling in half and chopping or digging, out a freaking spot to sleep under a rock and he's prying rocks out of the ground with it. I'm looking for more toughness. The edge holding ability, wear standpoint becomes a little less critical. Right now, I need that knife to not break, And so every knife we make, we're looking at the intended use. And this is, again, back to the very beginning of this, like, why buy a knife from an American-made knife company versus like China? You think they're putting this kind of thought into their products? Like, we're thinking about the end user and trying to provide a tool for a job,
They're probably thinking how they can send us shitty knives so that they chip easily,
Yeah. Don't get me started on that. It's an interesting time right now.
But everybody goes through the like flea market knife phase, you know? Like I remember when I was 13 years old and I was like going to the flea market in my hometown and like going through all the cases and like just nerding out on all these different things.
And I'm a fan of it, man. When you're young and you have no money, like I don't care if it's got an edge on it and a point, you know, and you're a kid, like,
oh, it's the greatest.
Yeah. I mean, I see kids all the time. They come up to me and they're like, look at this knife I just got at the gas station. And I'm like, that's freaking awesome. Good for you.
Yeah.
Because that's better like, that you could have gone and bought a Pokemon card. I mean, it's better than that.
Right. Yeah. It does seem that it's ingrained in us as males to like be a part of who we are. It's really interesting.
It's one of our first tools and most critical. Like if you think of all the way back to caveman days, like a knife, a weapon to protect yourself, to feed yourself. I mean, I think there is something very much so ingrained. I think that's also why we don't throw them away either. Even a junky knife or whatever, it's worn out or you break a tip off. I see so many people, they just put them in a safe. They never actually just throw it away, you know? Same with guns. I mean, guns that you don't use anymore or something happens to it or breaks or whatever, and you just like stick it in the corner of the gun safe or whatever, hang it up. But whoever throws away a gun, you know, I don't care how
I hope
inoperable it is.
Yeah.
You know, so I'm a fan of people buying all sorts of knives and guns. Like we're not the only knife company out there. I just want everybody to have one of ours, but man, I'm a fan of people, especially given, like, I think it's something so cool, like giving a kid their first knife. I remember getting my first little buck knife from my uncle and like being trusted enough. Like think about your little boy. He's this baby right now, but as he grows up and one day you're going to go, you know what, Ree, I think I'm going to give him a knife that I'm going to let him like carry around and like, he's probably going to cut himself. Like he might get maybe bad enough to get a stitch, maybe, but he's not going to really hurt himself that bad. But if you've done a good job parenting, I remember my uncle being like, now I'm trusting you. Like, don't screw up with this thing. I don't want to hear from your mom. Right. And I think there's like that rite of passage of like, dang, my uncle thinks I'm responsible enough to have a knife. And it's the same way with a gun. Like you get to a certain point in life where like, all right, this is your gun. You know the deal.
Yeah.
Be careful.
The utility and the tools, and they're just such a part of growing up and becoming a man, right? Mm-hmm. Like learning to whittle away. Like those things transcend kind of what it means to grow up.
Yeah.
Especially in America. Like if maybe not so much anymore, but like most of us grew up in the woods in some way, shape, or form. You can, but like building a fire, like you're probably going to have a knife with you to help with the process, right? That's part of what it means to be an American. And so that intrinsic value that you're getting out of this tool is something that will stick with you for the rest of your life. And so it's been really cool to see from my perspective, sort of your growth in this American ingenuity and taking something that is part of who we are as a culture and then finding, you know, what it means to become American made in a completely different way with something that you look at it and you're like, you don't need a bunch of knives, but you say that you can say that about a lot of things, right? And so it's so audacious to develop this as something that's going to be a business that can scale and grow is really an awesome undertaking to see. So it's fucking awesome.
Well, you guys paved the way. I appreciate that. But I was a lineman, just a black rifle fan, dreaming of doing this in 2018, 19, right in there, like really thinking about kicking this off. And I was a super fan of black rifle. I remember actually taking PTO in the summer or the fall of 2019. And I somehow I DM'd Evan and somehow I got a meeting with him and Matt on the phone because I wanted to try to figure out a way to, like, I don't know what my plan was, to be honest, make coffee openers or bag openers or what. I don't know what it was. I had no plan. But Evan and Matt took a call with me and I took PTO, and from 12:30 to 1 on my job site, I stood over on the edge of the job site. We were putting in underground power in Miller Creek. I remember it. I remember right where I was standing. And I told them, like, well, after Evan got done asking me if I was a communist because I lived in Missoula.
Yeah.
But I remember telling him, like, I don't know how, but someday we're going to work together. Like, someday we're going to work together. And, you know, end up over the years becoming friends with all you guys, now having a Black Rifle Coffee in our new manufacturing facility. You know, like, you guys paved the way. The way you guys, you weren't just a coffee brand, you were an idea. I think that's what struck so many of us as linemen, is that, like, did the world need another coffee company? Probably not. Like, there was plenty of coffee out there if you guys never would have come along. But you guys were like us. You were just like me and all my lineman buddies, and you were saying the you know, like, the funny shit, and you weren't afraid to, like, go against the woke BS that was starting to happen. And it was also awesome to listen to you guys, like, the, you know, back then when you were doing, like, the Core 4 podcast and you were talking about politics or whatever was happening, you guys as business owners were unafraid to just voice your opinion. And that was not common for business owners of large companies. They were afraid of having their opinion anywhere. And we're like, man, these guys own this big coffee company, and they're saying the exact same shit that we are saying, you know? And I felt like when I wore a Black Rifle Coffee t-shirt or a hat, I was saying something, you know? And it wasn't just about the coffee, but it was like, this is what I'm about. Like, you just see that hat or that shirt, you probably know what I'm about, right? And that's the one thing I'm hoping, that when you see an MKC shirt or hat in an airport somewhere from across the way, you know that dude that just walked by is probably a guy you could be a friend with, you know, and he probably believes in American manufacturing and, you know, bringing American jobs back and family and hunting and being a good community member. And just, like, you just know that's a solid dude you could count on, you know? And I feel like you guys really paved the way for that in a way we're trying to somewhat emulate that.
Yeah, I think it's definitely working and coming through for you guys. And
yeah,
I think the support you're getting is along the same vein as that too. And it means a lot to hear some of these veteran hiring stories. Like, that's ultimately what I want to get going and keep going on the podcast, is, like, it doesn't matter what sort of experience you have. Like, you can literally start from scratch and do anything and end up like the guy you got fucking running the show and being super happy over there.
Yeah, and it's hard
because
because
part of the process.
Some of these veteran guys need to understand that just because they did really amazing things in what they did doesn't mean they're going to just get hired into the executive suite on that, like, that reputation or that experience of what they did. Like, they did amazing stuff, but they might have to come into a company they know nothing about and literally start at the bottom. But because of their experience and because of their life lessons learned, their work ethics, everything that they've done, they will very likely, with the right attitude, work their way straight through that company into leadership type roles really quickly, because they're going to be people that really quickly you realize, like, we can count on this guy. We have several guys in our shop right now, and, like, Nick Patla, he's another guy that Air Force dude, younger kid that is now gone from a knife tech, just hired him off the street, whatever, knife tech. Now he's a leader in our shop. And there's other guys. So you may not get, like, that executive role that you would maybe think you should deserve or think you should have. But if you're willing to eat shit and go back to the very beginning, I think you'll see that those guys progress through really fast.
Yeah.
You know,
I agree.
Yeah.
All right, let's go mingle. We're at Archery Country. Also, if you're in the coffee club, you get an automatic partnership discount to MKC. So you can go, and I can't remember what the code is off the top of my head, but I know you guys are in there.
I can't remember either, but it's on your guys' partners page.
Yeah. Click
through that and get a discount.
Yeah. All right. So let's go shoot some arrows and enjoy Austin.
All right. Appreciate it. Thanks.